Well, anyway, folks, thank you for being here. Welcome to the Humanists of Greater Portland. We are an energetic, growing, alive group, and we certainly had it this morning with this wonderful half hour of music. Well, I'm happy to say that we got another song from our Pete and Paul, the Barquette brothers. So please take it away.
When you're down and troubled and you need some love and care, and nothing, no, nothing is going right. Close your eyes and think of me, and soon I will be there to brighten up even your darkest night. You just call out my name, and you know wherever I am, I'll come running to see you again. Spring, summer, or fall, all you've got to do is call, and I'll be there. Yes, I will. You've got a friend. If the sky above you should grow dark and fill with clouds, and that old north wind begin to blow, keep your head together. You just call my name out loud. Soon you'll hear me knocking upon your door. You just call out my name, and you know wherever I am, I'll come running, running, yeah, yeah, to see you again. Winter, spring, summer, or fall, all you got to do is call, and I'll be there. Yes, I will. Hey, ain't it good to know that you've got a friend when people can be so cold? They'll hurt you, yes, and desert you. They'll take your soul if you let them. Ah, but don't you let them. You just call out my name, and you know wherever I am, I'll come running, running, yeah, yeah, to see you again. Winter, spring, summer, or fall, hey now, all you got to do is call, and I'll be there. Yes, I will. You've got a friend, and you got a friend. Yeah, baby, you got a friend. Oh, honey, you got a friend. Oh, darling, you got a friend. Baby, you got a friend.
Oh, oh, fellas, thank you so much. I mean, that in this world of internet and distance, to have a friend that would come, that just was so sweet to hear that song. Thank you so much. And you'll be singing a little later too, right? With Jeremy. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for entertaining us this morning. And I'm gonna introduce our speaker in just a minute, but I forgot to say something this morning in the introduction, and Ann was kind enough to remind me. I want to make sure you can see this, but this flag is one of our very first flags that um, Pat Burnett made. And Pat is no longer, Pat is one of the original members and has deceased us, but she made this in honor of Pride Month. And this is going back to our roots, and which are many years old, guys. We celebrated our 50th anniversary last year. So this is a very special flag, and I'm so glad to be flying it in honor of Pride Month, and we'll be doing that through the month of June. So yes. Okay, now we will be introducing our speaker, and what a wonderful presentation we're going to have today. I'd like to introduce Dr. Kurt Bessemer. He is a professor of philosophy at Gonzaga University and is the co-editor-in-chief of, I'm going to say it wrong, but it's TECHNE, Techne Research in Philosophy and Technology. We're honored to have him here with us today for his program, GriefBots, LLMs, and the technological uncanny. So after I've messed up that introduction a little bit, hopefully you'll fix it for me, and we'll enjoy your presentation, Dr. Bessemer. Thank you.
Thank you. So I thought I would say just a little bit about me before I get started. So I've been here teaching at Gonzaga for about 22 years now, and my original training in philosophy was in French and German philosophy. So names you might know would be Edmund Husserl, Martin Heidegger, Jean-Paul Sartre, Merleau-Ponty. So it's classic 20th century French and German philosophy. And when I came to Gonzaga, I started taking an interest in courses that would be of interest to engineers and science students. Because all of the students at Gonzaga at that time had to take 4 philosophy classes. And so I was developing a class that I thought engineers might like. And so I got interested in technology and slowly developed an interest in the philosophy of technology. And I've been mainly focusing my research in philosophy of technology since about 2010, 2011. That's when my first publications came out. And so I've sort of pivoted away from the French and German philosophy, but I haven't pivoted that far because my approach to technology, as you'll see in the presentation, still harkens back to that kind of philosophic orientation. And what I'm interested in today, and I've always been interested in terms of technology, are novel technologies that I think lead us to then think philosophically. So part of my interest in novelty is that I think it clears the space for philosophy to actually do some work, and instead of being this disinterested sort of 30,000 feet kind of theorizing. And so hopefully I can convince you today that when you find a novel technology, call the philosopher and they may be able to help you out. So I have a PowerPoint. It's not much more than outline notes that will help me keep me on track, because if I don't have them, I'll keep going on. So it's not a spicy one. And I'll show a video or two to maybe make the points. And then we'll hold the questions and answers until the very end, if that's okay. My outline will be, I'll introduce GriefBots and CompaniaBots, and perhaps you're aware of these sort of new ways in which people are engaging with AI systems. And then I'll just briefly point out some of the similarities and differences. And then I'll do my best to describe this experience I call the technological uncanny. And then I want to move into some new thinking I have on these, trying to understand kind of what's going on philosophically when people engage with bots, AI bots in these ways, because these are just 2 of the ways in which people are using chat bots these days. And then I'll offer some conclusions. The presentation gets more, I guess, speculative the further we go along. because I'm working out these ideas in real time in a sense. So here we go. So I presume you're all familiar what a grief bot might be, but if not, I've got a definition here from Claude AI, which is my preferred AI system. And in general, grief bots are bots that are compiled or put together either before the person dies or after they die. So there's two ways in which the data is gathered by which the bot is configured, either antemortem and in the pre-death scenario. These businesses, I have a few listed here. You Only Virtual Seance, Storyfile, they all do something slightly different, but the general idea is that they try to put together a bot with which you can interact, and the interaction can be multiple modes. You can have just merely a text bot. So I have here a definition from Claude AI, which I thought would be appropriate, and it's actually very good. The grief bot is a chat bot or a bot you can interact with either through a text or a video. And some of them say, for example, Storyfile will do videos. Of course, those would be where we gather the data that informs the grief bot before the person dies. The general idea here is that the grief bot simulates the deceased individual or mimics their, like here, communication style, personality traits, and knowledge. And just to give a quick sample, this is not quite a grief bot because he's still living. Let's see if I can get there. See if this will work. I'll skip it. But if you go to this, maybe we can see it. All right, here we go. This is Seance AI. And can you all see William Shatner? No?
Not yet.
Okay, well, this is not working either. So I will, you know what it is. No, okay. I'll just go back to the slide. But if you look on say Seance AI, you or any of these sites, you'll see demonstrations of them. I have a 60 Minutes interview with the fellow who created a grief bot for his mother, and a lot of these times, this is what happens: is somebody is diagnosed with a terminal disease, younger person, and the person seeks to, after they die, bring together their digital footprint to create a bot that they interact with. So this is the notion of a grief bot, and maybe you guys have seen stories about these or know people who use them, maybe you use them yourself. So this is the grief bot, and then the second, are my slides still advancing? Yeah? Companion bot? Okay, good. So companion bots, these are also fairly common these days. These are AI systems in which you interact with them, not necessarily to gain information, but rather to have a sort of emotional connection with them. And they're meant to simulate friendship. And there's many stories. I have one here, a headline from the New York Times about a woman who claims she's fallen in love with her AI. There's all sorts of iterations of this. People who fall in love with their AI, it can be a chat bot where you're just texting. Most of them have voice. Most of them involve interacting with the bot with a voice, and there's not really video yet because the AI is sort of an imaginary. The image would be imaginary, and there's a number here of these companies here, and you can see their kind of tagline, the way in which they're presenting their services to potential customers, and you can see Romantic isn't intentionally crafting a bot for one to have a romantic relationship with. And I just saw a story, and I would link to it, but I'm afraid my screen sharing isn't working so well. The Rolling Stone magazine just came out with a really nice story about people who, after engaging with a chatbot for some time, sort of lose touch with what they're engaging with, and they start believing that they have spiritual experiences with these chatbots. And I call these stories of the weird, but part of what I want to do in thinking about companion bots and grief bots is ask what is the nature of this behavior, and normal people, seemingly normal people, engage them. So there's a whole iteration of ways in which people are engaging with companion bots in various ways. And that's really what I'm interested in, is thinking about the central puzzle for me, and I think for many people, is I know the companion bot is not a real person. So I don't have any problem with cognitive failure, yet I can't help but have an effective response to it. In other words, I think what happens with grief bots and companion bots is they speak to our emotional lives, and we know they're not real. In fact, in preparing for this, I looked at a number of what I guess I call profiles of people who claim they're in love with their chatbot. There's some stuff on 60 Minutes Australia has a really nice story on this. There's podcasts on this, and in no case are the people confused. They don't think there's a real person at the other end of the chatbot, but they're okay with the effective experience they have with a chatbot. And many of them will say something like, I prefer spending time with my chatbot than real people. And eventually they'll say sort of real people really sometimes aren't very nice to be around. And so when you look into these companion bots and grief bots, I think we have to acknowledge that the emotional experience that people are having is real. It's not, say, the kind of relationship a child would have to a stuffed animal. Like, those are real. But I think the temptation is to dismiss this as possibly aberrant psychological behavior. And that's really what I want to resist, because I think these experiences seeing companion bots and grief bots is, for many people, the initial response is what I call the yuck factor. This is really the technological uncanny. And what I want to do is I want to kind of resist that initial move in terms of thinking about in terms of accept or reject. So I've talked to several of my friends who are not philosophers about these things, and oftentimes it's a sort of accept or reject. They think this is some sort of aberrant behavior that, maybe some therapy or something else will help. So anyway, that's the phenomenon I'm looking at, or these ways in which people engage AI bots in an emotional way. And so here's some similarities and differences, and I think the differences are going to become important as my thoughts on these develop. But I think the similarity they both have is that they're both they're telepresences. And what telepresence is, it's a technological means by which that which is not present is made present. So, for example, I'm present in Spokane, physically present, but I'm telepresent with you folks in Portland. So that's the idea of telepresence. And we've had telepresence for quite some time. It's becoming more and more pronounced, especially after the COVID pandemic. We spent a lot of time with each other in telepresences that we would otherwise not have done. So we're very familiar with telepresences, and I think we're becoming more comfortable with them. But what the grief bots and companion bots do is they make that which is physically absent, either the deceased loved one or the lover, they make them present to me in my experience. And this is what I'm interested in. And this goes back to my initial interest in philosophy and phenomenology. Phenomenology is a philosophic approach that asks the question, how is it I experience the world? What are the conditions by which I can experience the world? How is the world made present to me? What's made present to me? These are the kinds of questions that phenomenologists ask. So I'm interested in the notion of telepresence and the experiences we have in telepresent medium. So I want to follow just on the differences here for the grief bots. The grief bot is mimetic. In other words, it's a simulation of a real person. In other words, in that sense, as a simulation, it's derivative and reductive of the original, right? So we can't really fully mimic or present the deceased person. So the grief bot is always a reduced simulation, but there's a real person as the object of the bot, and therefore we can talk about fidelity to the original. If you were to try the William Shatner bot, I've been chatting with it a little bit I don't know how well it mimics William Shatner, but it has a bizarre way of answering questions, I guess I should say. And then the final thing about grief bots is they tend to be static across time because we don't expect a deceased person to develop characters or habits. And it would be unusual if my grief bot started engaging in ways that the deceased person never did. So I think the grief bots are largely a static identity, I guess I could say. Now we go to companion bots. There's a difference there, and I'm using here the language of Jean Baudrillard, who was one of the main thinkers that gave rise to the theoretical framework of the Matrix way back in the 90s. And so, a companion bot is not a simulation, but it's what Baudrillard called a simulacrum. And a simulacrum would be a copy with no original. In other words, there's no external referent outside the companion bot. The companion bot itself becomes its own reality. And I've tried to capture what this reality is. And so I've called a companion bot, it's not a person, but a persona. And oftentimes when I listen to profiles of people who have the companion bots, they always have a name. So their name Eva, Eve, or something like this. And the people will claim that the chatbot definitely has a personality, and that personality develops over time, right? So that there is a coherent, consistent personality that the companion bots present, and that's actually what the people enjoy engaging with, is a predictable personality. And so I use this notion of persona, and I'm trying to find a really good analogy here, because I want to say that this persona has a sort of thin bit of reality to it. It's not purely make-believe or fantasy, because when people spend a lot of time with companion bots, they of course want to bring their friends and loved ones into that relationship. And when I've seen these profiles of this, the relatives and friends, the other people who experience a companion bot will agree that there is a distinct persona there that they can talk about and agree about, just like we could agree and talk about, I don't know, our father's personality. So I do think there's something real there. Of course, it's generated by the algorithm, and it's pegged to the interests of the user, but it isn't just a pure group of behaviors that are not consistent. So here's my thought about a persona. Maybe you guys can help me with this. If you take an actor like Tom Cruise has a personality that those that he knows personally could talk about. But he also has multiple characters he plays in films, but he also has a public persona that I think, could talk about and agree about, and say that there's a sort of persona there that's different from the characters he plays and his actual personality. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about with why I'm calling it a persona, is it's not quite a personality, because that's always tied to a person. But a persona can have its own sort of reality, not tied to a person and not tied to a fictional character, but have this sort of media existence, which is a star's persona is a media generated thing. So if I move on to the final few points, the fidelity of the companion bot, the persona, is just internal consistency across time. If my companion bot, Eve, Evan, or whatever their name is, if they demonstrate to me behaviors today that I saw yesterday, and they have a kind of identity across time, that would be the sort of stable reality they present. But that doesn't preclude them from changing across time, especially as I change. If you spend one fella has spent 3.5 years with his companion bot, and he's presented it with information and materials to in a sense cultivate its persona, such that he feels more comfortable being around the chatbot. But that means the chatbot itself has developed over time to be more desirous to him. So those are kind of the key similarities and differences. And the reason I want to get at this is because the ultimate question I think I want to ask is about fantasy and reality, or reality and truth, when it comes to the way people engage with these bots. And so I want to move on to this. One of the key ideas, what I'm I'm calling the technological uncanny. And um, well, sometimes this is called the yuck factor, but I think it's primarily an effective response to a novel technology. And I have many examples of this that I've experienced over time, but I thought maybe the best thing to do would be to show an example of someone experiencing the technological uncanny. So I'm going to share a video, and I hope this works. And if it doesn't, let me know. But I just want to describe this video. It's a little old. So the video comes from 60 Minutes in 2008. So the technology is a little old, but it's no less, I think, even astonishing today. And so the reporter, Scott Pelley, visits a lab, I think it's at MIT, where they're developing a brain-computer interface. And the idea of the brain-computer interface, and I think these are much more developed now, is if you take somebody who has, say, ALS or locked-in syndrome, where their body no longer functions or their body-brain connection is no longer sufficient for them to move their body, but yet their cognitive capacity is fully intact. What the folks at this lab at MIT were trying to develop was a way in which they could connect the brain directly to the computer in an interface. And the ultimate goal in the research, and I think this is now closer to reality, are various kinds of brain implants so that people can directly control a computer mouse or a computer cursor in order to use a computer. And I think this is fairly standard stuff today, but in 2008 it was new. So Scott Pelley is putting a BCI brain computer interface cap on his head, and he's trying the system out. Now in the video, it's only about a minute long, so you might want to. I want to sort of show what to look for, and I'm probably show it twice. But what I want you to look at is his reaction to the technology. So he sees the technology, he sees how it works, and his reaction is what I'm calling the technological uncanny. So I'm going to see if I can share the video now. So let me see. Let's see if I can do this. It's not letting me optimize for. Nope. All right. So all I'm going to be able to do is share sound and let me know if this works.
Okay.
All right, here we go. Whoop. So we did this before, it worked before. Okay, can you all see that?
We can see it. Okay, yes, we can see it.
And then let me know if you can hear it. Again, I'll play it. It's only a minute long. I'll play it twice so you can get the sort of full effect.
Okay.
Neuroscientist Dr.
Yes, we
Jonathan
can hear it.
Good.
at New York State's Wadsworth Center.
Yeah, this is basically a standard EEG or brainwave cap.
To understand how the BCI works, I asked researcher Teresa Vaughn to hook me up.
And you'll see their little white discs scattered around on your head.
Those discs are electrodes that pick up the faint electrical activity that brain cells create when they communicate with each other.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it's a little cold.
Teresa is putting a conductive gel on top of my scalp to help the electrodes pick up the signals.
All set?
All set?
I'm thinking of the letters of a word that only I know. Every time the computer flashes the correct letter on the screen, I silently think to myself, that's it, that's the one. That feeling of recognition sets off a unique electrical pattern in my brain, which the computer picks up.
This is remarkable.
It worked the first time I tried it, without a single mistake.
That is amazing. How about that? How about that? I never would have believed it. You know, I can.
Play it one more. Pick it up in the
On
middle
top
here.
of my scalp to help the electrodes pick up the signals.
All set?
All set?
I'm thinking of the letters of a word that only I know. Every time the computer flashes the correct letter on the screen, I silently think to myself, that's it, that's the one. That feeling of recognition sets off a unique electrical pattern in my brain, which the computer picks up.
This is remarkable.
It worked the first time I tried it, without a single mistake.
That is amazing. How about that? How about that? I never would have believed it. You know.
Okay, so Did that work? Did you all saw that?
Yes, worked great.
Oh, great. So what I think happens here is what I'm calling the technological uncanny, and you can see there Scott Pelley is he's in a sense speechless, and he even hugs himself in this sense of all right. I'm trying to share. Is that working again? The sharing screen? Yeah. Okay, so this is what I think happens. As one example of technological uncanny is the novel technology is um, so different from what he can expect. He's speechless at the end, and all he can do is sort of hug himself because of this feeling of comfort. And I say I think the two ways in which the technological uncanny manifests itself in revulsion and horror, or excitement and enthusiasm, or even it's a mixture of these things, right? It can be this melange of experiences, of emotions. And I think that's what I see Scott Pelley experiencing there. So that's what I'm trying to get at with the technological uncanny, and what I think is happening when people first encounter profiles of people falling in love with their AI bots or using grief bots is they have some experience like the technological uncanny. They're unsure of what to make of it, and they get a sense that the ground is shifting beneath them, that there's a new thing they need to account for in their lives. And I think that's really what I think is most interesting about the technological uncanny. And I think that when we were to, if I were to say, okay, well, what do we do with the technological uncanny? This is where I think the philosopher can come in and help and ask, well, what's going on here? We could just psychologize it and say, well, it's just a psychological, response. But I think that it's more than that. And I think there's three things I want to get at here. And again, I would be leaning on my experience of reading existentialist philosophers, because existentialist philosophers often took emotions as important, crucial ways of understanding human existence. So they would talk about anxiety or fear. Heidegger famously thought that moods were super important for us understanding the kinds of beings we are in the world, because as humans, we're always in some mood or another, and moods are ways in which the world reveals itself to us. When you're in a good mood, a happy mood, everything seems fantastic. When you're in a dark mood, not so much. And so I think the technological uncanny, there are three things here. One is the experience is about something real. In other words, it's not merely a rational fear, like a child's fear of a monster in the closet. There's something real going on, and that these experiences of the uncanny are actually privileged experiences that reveal a reality. And that reality they reveal, I think, often requires something alike philosophic reflection to understand what's really going on. And so what I think is happening in the technological uncanny is that we're experiencing the breakdown of our conceptual framework, or our conceptual repertoire is being stressed because we now have to have some new phenomenon we account for. And in the brain computer interface, what I think is happening there is Scott Pelley has to recognize that his conceptual framework that he brought into that story didn't account for a computer reading his mind, in a sense. So that's what I think is actually happening in the technological uncanny, is we're experiencing the incompleteness of our conceptual framework to handle the novelty that the technology is presenting to us. So when it comes to grief bots or companion bots, I think what we're realizing is the central puzzle, say, of a companion bot is how can somebody fall in love with a bot? And philosophers of love would say that's not actually love, because you love a person. You don't love a set of behaviors. So then the question I think we have to have is, okay, what does it mean to say you're in love with the bot? What is that kind of relationship? And can we understand the future in which there's going to be people who have relationships with bots? And we need to have a conceptual framework that can account for that. So that would be kind of how I've been thinking the technological uncanny comes in here, is grief bots, people having a bot that replicates or simulates a deceased loved one that they interact with. That is a kind of relationship to the past and to the person that I think we have analogs for, but it's new, right? And so I think the The uncanny asks us to recognize the incompleteness of our conceptual framework, and that the novelty of the technology not only announces the inadequacy of our framework, but it feels like it's pulling us into the future, and maybe it's a future we don't want. Maybe we don't want to live in a future where people fall in love with AIs, or we don't want to live in a future in which my loved ones have a grief bot of me, right? So I think that's the other aspect of the technological uncanny, is it presents us not just with novelty we can't conceptually articulate or accommodate, but it actually announces a future we feel ourselves being pulled into, that we may or may not want, because we don't understand that future. So that's why I think the technological uncanny becomes an occasion for us to think through in a more philosophic way what's at stake in the novel technology. Not just that, because the temptation on, say, someone like grief bots is to go to the psychologist and say, well, what do you think? Is this a proper way of grieving or a non-proper way of grieving? When I think the deeper issue is, what's at stake when we have a form of grieving that presents the deceased person in the form of a bot. So that's a technological uncanny. And then now I want to move, and this is my final points here. I want to move into more speculative thinking about what's going on. If what I'm saying is correct, is that when we're engaging with technologies that lead to this uncanny experience, and that philosophers can be helpful here, what's going on? And I think one thing that's going on is what I call the culture of simulation. And I think we're now entering into a society, we have been for a while in a society, but I think it's going to get worse, is that because of telepresence, the multiple modes of telepresence, the distinctions between true and false and real and fake are constantly challenged. They're challenged and problematized. So the way I think about this is when you're online and when you're on your screen, we're constantly faced with the question, how can one tell whether something is true or false or real or fake? I think that's the real kind of epistemological situation we're in, because I think it's a symptom of being what I call screen people, and we are screen people. And what I mean by screen people is a couple of things. First of all, if I said the average American spends 8 to 10 hours on a screen, various sizes a day, I don't think that would be shocking to anyone. Now, I just made up that statistic, but I think it's probably close to the truth. We're always on our screens. But what I'm thinking about with saying we're screen people is not the physical screen, right? What I'm thinking about is the logic of our digital interfaces, right? So the screen is just the interface, but there's a logic going on here. And I think there's a few points that lead to this cultural simulation. And what I mean by screen people is I think we've been screen people, and I'll peg it somewhat arbitrarily to 2007, because what happens in 2007 is you have the first iPhone and you have the introduction of social media to the general public. And so what you have all of a sudden is what I call a social internet, an internet in which we interact with constantly. We've always got our phones with us. Now, this didn't happen right in 2007. By about 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, having a smartphone is essential now. And by the way, one indication that you're a screen person is ask yourself, could I put all my screens down and live the same kind of life I'm living? And the answer is no. I mean, if we were to all put down our screens, we would be living like people in a different century. It would be like going back to 1989 or 1993 or something like that. And that's just not the lives we live anymore. And I think we can't live those lives. You can individually unplug, but the culture you're in is not unplugged. So that's the idea here is, okay, first of all, the screen is the logic of interaction with the internet. What happens in that interaction is that the screens are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. They're always with us. We engage with others and the world through algorithms. And here the algorithms are completely opaque to us. We have no idea the information that Netflix is using to generate the next suggestion for me, or why does YouTube think I want to see that video? They're opaque in that sense. They're also opaque in the way they surveil us. We don't know what information is being gathered on us. We don't know the profile that Google has on me. There is a profile that based on my Google searches. And in fact, it's tailored to me, or it's the people like to say today, well, my Google searches are curated for me, right? So in a sense, each one of us goes on to a different internet because of this interactive nature, the surveillance nature. And so therefore, what is made present to me through the screen is tailored to me. And as we know, this leads to echo chambers, filter bubbles. All of a sudden, I'm only seeing what I want to see. And this is where I think the connection between the true and the false and the fake and the real come about, is because we're entering an age of AI that's going to make this much worse, because the AI can simulate other people so well, we may never know when we're talking to another person. I mean, I'm sure you guys have had the same experience I've had where, actually, no, I'll tell you a story I had last fall. I was sitting in the airport waiting for a flight, and I don't ever get any calls. My wife's the only one who calls me, and my phone rings. And I was there with my wife because we were flying together. And I pick up the phone, and the person says, "Is this Kirk Besmer?" And I said, "Well, you called me. Who are you?" And he said, "Is this Kirk Besmer?" And I said, "Who are you?" And he said, "Are you a bot?" And I said, "I don't know. Are you a bot?" And then the person hung up. So here's a person, and it was clearly in a call center. You could hear the chatter behind him, who was used to calling bots. And so his first question was he talking to a real human being or not? That's what I mean. And he was. That's the ironic thing. He thought he was talking to a bot, but as a real person. So this is what I mean by the culture of simulation. With AI, it's just going to get worse. How do I know I'm talking to a real person? I would venture to guess that most of the advanced chatbots today could pass the Turing test, at least what as Turing understood it. So the question of whether the person on the other end is a bot or a person, that's just one symptom of this culture simulation. Okay, so that's really what I'm interested in, is because I think what's going on, one way to understand what's going on with chatbots and companion bots, or sorry, grief bots, is something like this. And I think once you recognize you're in a cultural simulation, which I think we're in largely, you have three possible responses. The first response is to continually insist on enforcing the distinction between the true or the false and the real and the fake in all domains. And I would put myself in this camp. I think the true and the false and the real and the fake are really important. However, doing so would lead me to persistent frustration and agitation. So I don't think it's a viable alternative to say I always have to know whether I'm talking to a bot or a human. Because if the bot can answer my questions, then I guess I don't need the human. So I think that this is a temptation, but I think ultimately it's going to lead to frustration. And then the second position is, well, I just become selective in which domains I enforce the distinction between the true and the false and the real and the fake. And here I think this is the interesting position, but it's also the scary position, because this would mean the people who are falling in love with their AI bots or using grief bots are actually early adopters. They're recognizing the logic inherent in the culture of simulation and saying, well, when it comes to romance, I don't need a real person. A imitation or a fake person is sufficient for my emotional needs. And so maybe one way to see the people who are using grief bots and companion bots is they're simply early adopters. And then the third approach to recognizing one's in a culture of simulation is to abandon the distinction between the true and the false and real and the fake in most domains, where you just say, well, I can't tell, so it doesn't matter. And this is portrayed very well in the film Her, which came out 12 years ago. It's very prescient. And I think it's a really good look at what would it be like to live in a culture of simulation where you no longer care about that distinction between the true and the false and the real and the fake. And one thing, and I'll just end on this note, is that the movie Her, the film Her, it's a very creepy movie. And I think it's creepy because we are people who still insist on the true and the false and the real and the fake. And we find it uncomfortable when that distinction is problematized. So I think that's another reason why we find people who claim they fall in love with their chatbots or people who use grief bots, we find it a little unusual, creepy. I want to call it the uncanny, is because we're recognizing we're at the beginning of we're in a culture in which these distinctions we've always made are now problematized in ways that we really can't escape. So I'm rushing here because I want to save time for questions. I think we have about 30 minutes for questions. So I'll just stop there and we can work the rest of this out in the Q&A. Thank you. Thanks.
Oh, you left us with lots of questions. I am sure of that, because that has just filled my mind. All kinds of
There's
thoughts.
lots of stuff there.
I'm sure the audience feels the same way. That was wonderful. Thank you. And very eye-opening, very new thoughts, new thoughts. All right. So I think all of you know how this works, but I'm going to, if you have a question, raise your hand. If you're here, raise your hand. Oh boy, the hands are going up. And you'll be given a number. If you're on the Zoom, the virtual screen here, put your name in and I'll feed the, call you up. Folks, we've got tons of questions here. I'm asking you to please keep your comment to introduce your question to a sentence or two at the most, and then ask a one question. Here we go. Questioner number one here. Who's number one? There. Just all you can do. Am I right, Dave?
Mike or no?
No, you're being
okay. I'm being Mike.
There we go. Thank you.
Okay. My name's Andrew, and my question is about the very early part of your presentation. You talked about how companion bots are not, you don't want it to psychologize them,
Right.
and you didn't want to compare it to a child's stuffed animal. And my question is, I kind of see it as that. I kind of see any love or personhood that the chatbot has is being created by the person who is actually interacting with that chatbot. They are reading
Okay,
more.
what is your question?
Yeah. So my question is, I guess, if you could explain that, like, right, what is the distinction between those two things, the child stuffed animal and the companion bot?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I should say that I don't want to merely psychologize them. Clearly, psychological explanations are useful, and they get at the reality of what's going on. What I was trying to say is that if we rely merely on psychological explanations, we may miss something deeper that's going on. And this is my pitch for why we need a philosopher. It's sort of a contrary to most intuitions. But to go back to the use of children's stuffed animals and companion bots, we tend to think that the children have stuffed animals and they have emotional connection to them. And we now sometimes give them to old people who have cognitive impairments, right? So that they have there are these furry bots that they use in Japanese homes for elderly who have memory problems. And I think we think it's okay for children and elderly to have those kind of emotional objects because they're either not fully rational as children or not fully rational as adults because they have cognitive impairment. But I think we would find it a little bit weird if you came into work and sitting in the chair of your boss's office was a stuffed gorilla that he referred to and personified throughout the day. I think we tend to think that the stuffed animals are fine for people who are not fully rational, but it seems odd. I think again, if I had a student who brought a stuffed animal to class, now they could say, well, it's an emotional support stuffy or something like that. But I think that's the only distinction I would make. But I don't want to deny that a psychological explanation of people falling in love with companion bots is useful. I think that totally is. Yeah.
Number two, go ahead, Maya.
So I think this presents an ethical dilemma with both of them. So the grief bot, my question is what are your thoughts on it actually preventing somebody from going through the natural grief process? Yeah. And with the companion bot, there's plenty of research showing how crucial it is for us humans to be in physical space with each other. So I think that it masks the underlying issue. So I'm curious about your thoughts on those two things.
Again, I would say that the psychological explanations definitely have purchase, and there are broad ethical implications in using grief bots and companion bots. And those are, so I like to draw a distinction when it comes to technologies and think about ethical issues. There's what I think are the external ethical issues of consequences that come from this. And I think that's what your question gets at is, well, what are the consequences of using a grief bot? Does this delay the grieving process and that sort of thing? And I think that's definitely an interesting and pressing ethical issue. And the same with companion bots. It seems like a denuded way of engaging with others in a social context, and you're actually not engaged with others. I think that's those are definitely interesting issues. What I was trying to get at is, and I'm doing a paper in a couple of weeks on grief bots, and I bring up all those many of those issues about grieving, and maybe this is an aberrant form of grieving or not a good form of grieving. But I mean, grieving itself is culturally conditioned. I mean, I think grief bots are more understandable to me than companion bots. Because if you think about it, what I think a grief bot gets at is the ultimate reality is that the dead don't need us, right? The living need the dead don't need the living. And this causes problems for people, and it always has. I mean, if we lived 150 years ago, we wouldn't be talking about grief bots. We would talk about seances and finding a medium that could allow your loved one to channel their thoughts to you. And you can still find mediums today. I'm sure this is still a bit of our culture of thinking about the dead as still around. But of course, they don't need us. And if we were in the Middle Ages, we would think about purgatory. You know, Uncle Bill still needs me to pray for him because he's in purgatory. So I do think there are historical antecedents to grief bots as a way of making the dead still present to us, and that's slightly different than the companion bots. But I would agree that if one uses, I mean, seances, I think we would think are generally, I don't know, psychologically, would they be harmful if the person engaged in them for too long? Would this stop the grief? It could be. So those are definitely issues, I should say. I think that that's true. But what I'm interested in is thinking about the culture by which a grief bot becomes the way in which you allow the missing dead to be present, right? If we lived in a culture of spiritualism in the 19th century, we would have seances. But we live in a culture that in which, this is my read, is we live in a culture in which simulation is now becoming a dominant way in which we experience the world, ourselves and others. And that's the way we do it. We don't have seances, but we have grief bots. But I don't want to say they're exactly parallel, but I think they fulfill the same kind of deep psychological need that the living have for the dead. So
we have 7 more questioners.
Okay.
I'm going to go with number 3.
Please, number 3, Richard.
Yes. You mentioned the distinction between grief bots and companion bots, in that the companion bots are supposed to learn. They're essentially large language models that learn from the person interacting with them.
Yeah.
Now, if that person interacting
That's your question.
if that person interacting with them is depressed, and the large language model only makes them more depressed, shouldn't there be really fairly strict regulation of what these models can do to interact with people?
No, I think there's regulations on that. I mean, the way I try to think about this is anytime we engage with an algorithm, and this is why I'm trying to talk about being screen people, anytime we engage with an algorithm that's observing our behavior and modifying it in light of that, right? Any basic prediction model like YouTube predicting videos does this, right? So the very norm by which my future predictions are constrained by the algorithm are there. And the regulation bit, I think, so I'm saying is I think we're at early stages. We're not entirely sure how people are going to use these companion bots. The problem with regulation is it's retrospective. It's not prospective. And I think we now are living in a very permissive AI environment when a lot of harm is going to be done with these sorts of bots before we recognize it. And I think the regulation is going to come too late. This is my real worry. I mean, if you look at social media, we didn't do anything for social media. Now here we are almost 20 years later, realizing how that was just a really bad idea to not regulate it, but we didn't know what to regulate beforehand. But yeah, I think there should be robust, if not regulation, at least developers should be thinking about AI in responsible terms. What does it mean to have a responsible AI program? That's really where I think we need to be looking, because the regulation is after they become, the harm is done, I guess, is after regulation, and it's hard to get it back into the genie back into the bottle. But I agree, there needs to be some way in which the use of these, how do I put this, that we should allow people to use AI in whatever form they want, and then later try to reel it back in. That's a bad idea. That's a mistaken way to go about it.
Questioner number 4.
Come on in, number 4. Hi.
I'd like to focus on the companion bot. To me, to some degree, we all want to go down the path of least resistance.
Sure.
And if I form a human-to-human relationship, I'm talking with a real human, it's difficult sometimes. We disagree. We have to argue. We have to compromise. And I can go through a whole litany of things. But if I control the AI, I'm getting what I want with not much effort.
Follow up with your question,
I'm
please.
kind of concerned about the outcome of that.
Yeah. Well, I would agree. So this is where I would go with the philosophers of love, who say that it's not actually love. It's a simulated relationship. It's not a real relationship, but the feelings are real. So that's the thing I think that I find fascinating is I wouldn't want to deny that the person actually feels those feelings, because who am I to say what they feel or don't feel? But they're not in love, and this is where I think that I think maybe the notion of technological uncanny can come in and help us is we need a new concept or new way of thinking about it when people have relationship with simulated beings. What does that mean? What is the nature of that relationship? It's not real love, right? Because the main thing you're getting at there is the beloved has to be able to resist me. That's the moment of reality, right? If my AI bot can't leave me, then it is all about me. It's all a solipsistic, and that's what's going on. I think that's really the notion. Now, people who have these companion bots will disagree. They'll say, no, I do have conflicts and these sorts of things. But of course, they're always resolved because this is a consumer-made product. But I think the question for us is the temptation is to pathologize it and say, well, this is just not a real, this is a denuded version of a human relationship. Maybe I'm wrong here, but if we are living in a culture of simulation, there may become a time when we have to recognize that a relationship with a bot, although not the same as a human, is a legitimate relationship, and it's one we're going to have to be able to, I think, conceptually handle or have room in our conceptual repertoire to make sense of that, rather than just dismiss it as pathological or less than. Because I think really what we have to come to is asking ourselves, how are we going to relate to these AI systems? Because they're not people, they don't think like people, but they're going to be in our lives in a way that are like people. So that's really the way I would think about it. Is I would agree it's not a preferable relationship for many people, but this is kind of my question. Are these people early adopters or are they aberrant? And if they're early adopters, then they're a signal to us that we need to start thinking about how do we account for that. So.
Questioner number 5.
Mine is kind of twofold. One is, if you're creating a grief bot with a person who is soon to be deceased, do you, you are being able to take some of their own statements and things like that. If I were creating a grief bot, say with my mother, who is long gone, would then their personality reflect what I want them to, or how do we get their personality into that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because I think about this myself, right? So I've lost my parents recently, and so I'm kind of new to thinking about, they live fine, full lives. And so my brothers and I get around it, and when we get together now, we talk about mom and dad, and already so this is the thing, is we've already reduced them down to these memories of them. And my brothers will say things that I think are just inaccurate when they describe, either my father or mother. I'd say, well, that you're missing this bit of it. So I think we're always already in that position of when someone's gone, whatever experience we have of them is reductive, whether it's in our memories or in the grief bot. So I would agree. That's why I find actually the antemortem grief bots most fascinating, because the individual themselves wants to have a little control over the way they're remembered. And is that more faithful? I don't know. I mean, if I had the choice between contributing to a grief bot that my family was going to make of me, whether I participated or not, I would definitely participate, because I think it would allow me to then at least cultivate to some degree what I should be to them. I think that is the way I would think about it, but I think we're always already in that position of, once the dead are gone, the only way we can bring them back is going to be through our own lenses. Right. And a grief bot is one version of that.
Okay. Joyce is with us over Zoom. Joyce, come on in and ask your question.
Okay, it looks as though there might have been 9 people ahead of me that got moved.
No, that's okay. You're the only one on Zoom. Go ahead.
All right. Don't we project personalities onto the actual people we're interacting with? Have we really crossed to a new culture or just a new degree of simulation? Because we're never free from our own perceptual limits.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good question. I guess what I would think of is there are still ways in which the other person that I know very well can surprise me and show that my version of their simulation is inaccurate, right? I think that's when I think about. I mean, I've been married. My wife and I have been together over 20 some years. She still surprises me. There's still things she does that I wouldn't have anticipated, or and so I think that's part of the, I guess, magic is maybe not the wrong thing. The interesting thing about being with someone for a long time, you never really fully know them. And you're getting at the really interesting question is when I say I love my wife, what is it I love? Right? Is it a set of behaviors or is something behind that? And I think that's what's interesting with the grief bots is the companion bots is I think what's enticing for the user is that there's a set of behaviors that I find lovable. And how would that differ from a real person? And I would want to say that it's the surprise factor or the inability of me to exhaust my understanding of the other, that the other I recognize is always beyond me, I guess. But yeah, this is true. I mean, to some degree, the other people are, and this is the hard thing of being open to allowing them to surprise us. Yeah.
Very good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Questioner number 6 here at Friendly House.
Hi, great to see you again, Professor Bresmer.
Oh, hi, Jeremy.
Feels like I'm back in class. So I was your first cohort that had the social media, and you called us addicted to it like crackheads back then. You gave us a hard time about our phones, and I had a flip phone back then. So my question to you is, are we entering the fentanyl crisis? Is this just becoming more prevalent everywhere you go, or are you seeing a countercultural push from your younger students?
Oh, that's interesting. So I mean, I get definitions of companion bots and grief bots from Claude because I'm using Claude, which is my preferred AI system, because the students are. So I need to become conversant in it. And what I see is a number of students, I would say maybe 10 to 20% who are completely anti-AI. And I think it's the technological uncanny bit of it, the yuck factor. And then there's another 20% who think it's the greatest thing ever. And then there's a wide range in the middle for whom they're not quite sure how to use this again. But I do think that, so this cultural simulation is something that I've been thinking about for a while. And I didn't really buy it until I started seeing the AI bots, and that's when it really started coming to the fore. So I think we're I mean, I would recommend anybody to go back and see this movie, Her, in 2013. It's a very difficult movie to watch. And when I first saw it, I thought it wasn't a very good movie, but it's held up very well over the years. And I think it's indicating kind of where we're going, because what you're seeing is, I mean, I didn't talk about this, but one aspect of a cultural simulation is human relationships become reduced down to phoniness. And I think that comes across very well in Her. If it no longer matters whether I'm being sincere or phony or true, or, this I would say sincere or phony, or the personal interaction versions of true or false, then phoniness becomes the way in which we engage each other. And then human interaction gets reduced down to chit chat. And I see that happening a lot. I mean, when I used to go into classrooms before class, I would have students to be quiet because they're all talking to each other. Now nobody talks to anybody. I wish they would. I mean, for anybody who hasn't been in a classroom in 20 years, you would be shocked. You walk in the classroom and it's absolute silence. And I will say these students today, they know how to be silent. You can just sit there. I could probably not start class for 10 minutes and they would just sit there in silence. Whether they have the phone or not. I mean, if they have the phone, they'll be looking at it, but otherwise they're pretty good at just being quiet. It's really the interaction, the casual everyday interaction with strangers. I don't see that. And I think that's an indication of the ability to control my environment. And the new ones are using the earbuds or the headphones. That's the other big way in which we check out and decide we don't want to engage with one another. So I think we're at the beginning of a way in which social engagements are going to become more valuable and rare and cultivated in that way. So.
Thank you. Questioner number 7.
7?
8. Yes.
Oh, 8. No, it should be 7 because Jets. No? Okay, questioner number 8.
Oh, over here.
Okay.
Is there a long-term utility to these grief bots? Like I can see where we're using it right now to talk to our dead loved one. But will that maybe in the future be passed down to our descendants, generations removed, to remember us by, kind of like the way pharaohs put up monuments and giant hieroglyphic rooms telling of their accomplishments and how great they were in bed or whatever? Does that seem like that could be the future in its own weird way?
This is a great question. This is actually one of the purveyors of these. This is their cause for use is their, I mean, they're looking for that, what they call the killer app. What's the killer application of this technology? And one is it allows your descendants to see you, right? I mean, maybe I'll not live long enough to see my grandkids, but would I want them to know me? And maybe I'd put together a companion bot for that. I definitely think that's part of what I'm sort of toying with, this idea. If they're early adopters, that's what it's going to look like. In the future, we're going to have our own bot that lives on beyond us and allows people to interact with it. I mean, one use of these, and it's not actually a grief bot, one use of these bots like this are in museums. You know, there are fewer and fewer World War II veterans around, so they're interviewing them, talking to them, and then they become part of an installation, installation for World War II remembrance and these sorts of things. And those seem to me to be very legitimate uses of these kinds of bots. But that's the thinking, is that this becomes a way of preserving yourself for future generations. Yeah, as long as the digital, media lasts and is usable. So no, that's a really good question.
Okay, question number 7. Have you appeared yet? No. Okay, question number 9.
Yeah, go ahead, Skyler.
So my question is, do you or anyone in your field have the intention or are already creating a distinct education that could be a gold standard for defining the real and the fake? Yeah. And I bring this up because I think this is really what we lack in terms of, and what causes all of the problems of fear versus excitement, or revulsion versus attraction to it, is we don't have an educational way of defining how to define those two things, what's real and what's fake. And I think if we
What's your question?
Well, that was it. Do we have anyone in the field pushing research for an educational thing?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I have a kind of a longer answer, but I'll go with just a shorter answer. We're still trying to figure out, I mean, we're right now figuring out how to think through AI and how to integrate it into the education system such that the students understand its uses and proper uses and these sorts of things. But I think the broader question is, and if this analysis is right, so really the analogy I would give is go back to the printing press, right? So the printing press comes out in 1440, and what it leads to this is ultimately, the Reformation, democracy, even the humanist movement itself, right? So 1440, the printing press comes out. In 1517, what is that? Almost 60 years later, Martin Luther nails his 95 Theses up there. And then you have the beginning of the revolution that the printing press brought about. If what I'm trying to say is correct, that digital technologies, which have only been with us for 30 years, are going to have a similar kind of revolutionary effect. And one of those effects is the true and the false are going to be constantly problematized. We're only 30 years into this, and we don't yet know the full ramifications.
No.
Having said that, we're still in a literate culture. I'm a literate person, and I'm teaching literate people, but I'm trying to introduce them into this new virtual technology that they're digital natives in. Some kids today are using iPads before they can speak, right? So they're digital before they're even oral, much less literate. So the question you ask is a real puzzle. What does it mean to take people who are hybrid culture, namely students who are literate and digital, and enforce upon them the true, false, real, fake distinction, which is really a part of a literate culture? Because it may be in the future that is a distinction that is constantly going to be problematized. I think it's a great question. We try to get students to think through the contemporary framework in which, the very idea that fake news is a category we can talk about is an indication you're in a cultural simulation, right? If somebody can just refer to fake news as if it's a real thing, then we are in a position where true and the false are already sufficiently problematized that we don't question that category. So I throw my arms up. I don't know how to go about doing this as somebody who teaches young people, except to point out there are still places in which literate culture is dominant. right? When you can check sources, you can have authority figures who you can trust to be truthful, right? This is the other indication we're living in a culture of simulation, is that we have an administration that's anti-science, right? They trust oracles. I don't know. I mean, so that indication that science and authority, that's a bit of literate culture that is now being thrown over, because the question of connectivity and access are the ways in which people arrive at what they believe is true. So I don't know the answer to your question, because I don't know what that pedagogy or what that curriculum would look like, because we're entering an era in which we still haven't figured out these categories of literate culture of true and false, real and fake are problematized in digital culture to a very deep degree. So I don't know the answer to it.
Yeah. Thank you. Good question. Questioner number 10.
No, 11. Okay. Oh, you're at 11. Okay.
I was afraid.
Oh, was there a 10?
Yeah, he's 10.
Oh, sorry, Leslie. Yeah, go
I was
ahead.
hoping it wasn't going to get to me, but because unfortunately, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
As a cynic and as a person concerned about
Leslie,
our
ask your question, because we're real close on time.
our green footprint and the energy involved, we're blindly slipping into where we're just, this is another growth thing, and we're getting, so do you have a concern about this power usage, our footprint, and not interrelating with people?
No, certainly the other shoe that has yet to be dropped is the environmental damage done by these systems. I mean, I think most people just are unaware of how damaging they are, how much energy they take up. In fact, the guy who runs ChatGPT, there's a newspaper article the other day, he asked people to stop thanking ChatGPT because that costs energy, and we need to conserve as much of the energy and the computing power. But I think these are, and from an environmental standpoint, part of the fossil fuel disaster. It's terrible. But there's so much money going into them that it's a problem, but the train's not going to stop unless people decide, wait, this is the worst use of energy that we possibly could. But I don't see that happening because the forces are against that. They just are. But no, the environmental aspect of it has to be acknowledged, and more attention needs to be paid to it, because I think that might get people to pull back a little bit.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And our final question is question 11.
Yes, you mentioned that there are many precedents for this. I think that somebody will realize that your kids will grow up perfectly if you raise them socializing with a bunch of companion Stepford kids. And is it possible that our civilization's been on a bad course for a long time, and they're only going to notice it when it gets so extremely crazy that that kind of thing is happening?
Idiocracy.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I hate to say, but I think it was Facebook had proposed developing a chat bot for lonely kids. So you got a lonely kid at home you're worried about? Well, you give them a chat bot.
Yeah.
Of course, that raised the hackles of a number of people, because of the obvious problem is that you're going to make the lonely kid lonelier.
Yeah.
But I do think that, again, if this idea of the culture of simulation and us being screen people, these are always dangers and threats that we decide that we would prefer to be online with a bot than a real human. I think that's definitely a part of it. And children are going to do that as well. And this is to get back to the very first question, is a really nice way to come back to it, is that children don't make the distinction in terms of real and fake the way we do. You know, I have a 6-year-old and he still tells me stories about what his stuffed animals tell him.
Yeah.
Right? The last thing he needs is a chatbot, for crying out loud. So I agree. I think that the dangers we see, we just have, the tech companies do not care. They just do not care.
Don't care.
And they will build that bot for the children, and that's for us as adults to say, no, you can't have these. But again, if we go back to, then the adults are having chatbot lovers. It seems to me that's also along the same lines of, how do you stop that? Because the ease of use and the way in which it makes the user just happy in a way humans don't. So I think these are all really great questions. And I hope I've answered them and brought some light on these.
Yes.
So
done a great job.
Yeah.
Done a great job. And I want to really compliment our audience, because they stayed with the question. Good job today, guys. Really, really good job. Thank you.
11 questions in. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you guys for the opportunity. These are ideas I've been playing around with for a while, and I like to bring them out because when I talk about this, I'm at professional conferences talking about other philosophers, but I really like talking to non-philosophers and making the pitch that I think philosophy is useful for understanding the technological world that we live in. And I say this to my philosopher friends because some of them don't believe it. So anyway, I'm really grateful for this opportunity, and I really enjoyed it.
Oh, so did we, Dr. Bestman. Thank you so much. And thanks, Jeremy, for bringing him to us.
Thanks.
Absolutely wonderful.
Well, thanks for coming out, everyone. It's coming through loud enough.
Yep.
So in honor of some of what was discussed today about grief bots, relationships, we wanted to pick some songs here at the end that made us think about what really matters in this life, what really matters to us going forward. And since the 20 years that have passed since I was in Dr. Besmer's classes, I've had a lot of great times, but I've also lost a lot of friends and family along the way. So this song is in honor and thanks to them. So I know this first one you probably won't know. A few of you might. If you don't know the words, give it your best shot. Just hum along to Pachelbel's Canon because it's the same exact notes of the song. That's the beauty of taking songs that are no longer copyrighted. But we've got a good one for you, and then I think everyone should know the final song. And please sing loud, sing proud. Think of what brought you here, the community, the friendship that we're all craving, that we all need. This isn't something selfish. This is something that you can give to others. You gain from it, and the world benefits. Please, sing along. Enjoy the last couple songs. This first one's called Memories.
Here's to the ones that we got. Cheers to the wish you were here, but you're not. Cause the drinks bring back all the memories of everything we've been through. Toast to the ones here today. Toast to the ones that we lost on the way. Cause the drinks bring back all the memories. And the memories bring back you. There's a time that I remember when I did not know no pain, when I believed in forever, when everything would stay the same. Now my heart feel like December when somebody say your name, cause I can't reach out to call you, but I know I will one day, yeah. Everybody hurts sometimes, everybody hurts someday. Everything gonna be alright. Go and raise a glass and say, here's to the ones that we got. Cheers to the wish you were here, but you're not. Cause the drinks bring back all the memories of everything we've been through. Toast to the ones here today. Toast to the ones that we lost on the way. Cause the drinks bring back all the memories of everything we've been back you. Do 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 do. Memories bring back you. There's a time that I remember when I never felt so lost, when I felt all of the hatred was too powerful to stop. Now my heart feel like an ember, and it's lighting up the dark. I carry these torches for you, but you know I'll never drop, yeah. Everybody hurts sometimes, everybody hurts someday. Everything gonna be alright. Go and raise a glass and say, here's to the ones that we got. Cheers to the wish you were here, but you're not, 'cause the drinks bring back all the memories of everything we've been through. Toast to the ones here today. Toast to the ones that we lost on the way, 'cause the drinks bring back all the memories. And the memories bring back you. Do 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 do. Memories bring back you. Do 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 do. Memories bring back you.
Thank you so much. If you were curious about which young member suggested that song, it was our wonderful, lovely President Anne. She recommended that to me, and I was like, what? That song's in the last 20 years. What are you doing, you whippersnapper?
Sometimes in our lives, we all have pain, we all have sorrow, but if we are wise, we know that there's always tomorrow. Lean on me when you're not strong, and I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on, for it won't be long till I'm gonna need somebody to lean on. Please swallow your pride if I have things you need to borrow, for no one can fill those of your needs that you won't let show. Just call on me, brother, when you need a hand. We all need somebody to lean on. I just might have a problem that you'd understand. We all need somebody to lean on. Lean on me when you're not strong, and I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on, for it won't be long till I'm gonna need somebody to lean on. Just call on me, sister, when you need a hand. We all need somebody to lean on. I just might have a problem that you'd understand. We all need somebody to lean on. And if there is a load you have to bear that you can't carry, I'm right up the road. I'll share your load if you just call me. Call me if you need a friend. Call me. I'll be right now. Call me if you need a friend. Call me.
Thank you, everybody.